What is up, guys? Welcome to the Meaning Enough Podcast. I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And this is the podcast where we talk about your favorite movies and the deeper meaning within their films. However, we're doing something a little bit different in honor of 4th of July. We are doing an Independence Day analysis, breakdown of the great Independence Day saga, the great franchise that it is, even though it only has 2 movies. This movie is actually, it means a lot when it comes to cinema in general. At least the first one does. So we want to talk all about it, especially because of 4th of July weekend and in honor of 4th of July weekend. RB3, this was your idea, man. Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, I just figured, right now we're not really celebrating 4th of July like as an actual holiday as a country. At least we shouldn't be. This isn't the right time for that. That's why, shout out to Juneteenth a couple weeks ago. We did our episode on Black Cinema for that. But instead of talking about, the actual holiday, why don't we talk about like the movie that everybody enjoys, starring, one of our favorite movie stars ever, Will Smith, and just like find a fun way to spend the Independence Day discussion. Why not?
Sabrina, what are your thoughts on this movie, and what is your memory of first watching it?
I actually, so I've talked about this a little bit before, but my dad would have barbecues a lot. And while there was the barbecue going on, there was always a movie playing. So sometimes it was stuff like Back to the Future, but definitely during the summer, Independence Day is one of my dad's favorite movies. So it's something that I saw a lot when I was a kid. And this movie is just, even just with the themes, for how fun it is, it also really is just like important, and it's a very fun, interesting story, and the way it's presented, it totally holds up. Like, obviously there's the normal cheesiness of every kind of action movie at that time, but this one's a really, really great one, and it kind of means a lot to a lot of people, and it's definitely like, it has a prolonged life. Like, it's still celebrated to this day. Hello, we're doing the episode on it. So yeah, it's a really good one.
It's interesting, right? Because all the cable networks are probably playing this as well.
Yeah.
I see it all the time, at least. My thing about this movie is that it's kind of self-aware, RB3. I don't know if that's correct, but I feel like it's very self-aware, which makes it so enjoyable. And obviously the Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum team-up duo thing is really cool. But talk to me about the comedy in this movie and the almost self-aware cheesiness of it all.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of the perfect action movie because of how self-aware it is. I mean, obviously there's been this whole kind of trope through sci-fi really since the 1950s that we've talked about a number of times on this podcast, right? The idea of the scary aliens, the idea of the others, the idea of the invasion, and this kind of takes it to like the biggest scale I think we've seen most alien movies take it to the point where they like literally blow up the White House, right? So this kind of mixes the old classic sci-fi tropes that we know from old alien films with like the big scale, big budget, blockbuster formula that started coming up in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
Especially after, this is 1996, which is 3 years after Jurassic Park. So by this point, we were starting to get accustomed to the big budget sci-fi blockbusters. So this kind of fits perfectly into that mode. At the same time, you got Will Smith, who literally is coming right off of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Fresh Prince finished airing in 1996 when this movie came out. And he already had a big rap career before even being on Fresh Prince. So you had like a super likable star, a super familiar concept, and it just worked on every level because of it.
Yeah, that I kind of want to go back on that because I do want to do a whole Will Smith section to this conversation, but I want to go back on the idea of what you said, that it's a throwback because of the way the aliens are framed, where in modern sci-fi, there's more of a, hey, let's try to understand each other type vibe with the aliens, whether it's something like Arrival, for example, which is much more like, hey, the aliens come here, let's try to understand them. Whereas like the throwback back in like, I don't know, the 40s and the 50s, it was much more like War of the Worlds, and they're just here to murder us all, and we have to murder them back. Like, it's very upfront as far as like alien equals bad guy. What do you think of that whole idea, Sabrina?
It's really cool because it kind of is very telling of the way America is. That's why, obviously, this is something that the whole world is dealing with in the film, but since we're focused on America and on Independence Day and everything it represents, this kind of story being told in this way kind of is what like makes it more profound, because it's like, oh, something's different. they are going to attack us. They are more advanced than us. They are better than us. So we are going to go against them. And I want to go back to what RB3 said about the aliens. You know, they don't talk, and that makes them this scary, sinister, unknown being. And yeah, so I think the fact that this film does focus on the US in general really does change the entire thing, because if it was the whole world it'd be a different story, but we know with our patriotism and our like America first type of mentality, it really does elevate this type of story and elevate the film as a whole.
It's such a fascinating conversation. Obviously, my favorite all-time anime, at least now, is Attack on Titan. And Attack on Titan is very similar in the sense of like there's this outside uh, being that is attacking the walls. We don't know what they are or what they want. All we know is that they attack us and they eat us. That's essentially what Attack on Titan is. So what it does is it riles up the community inside the walls to say, hey, we have this outside enemy. We know who the enemy is. It's the Titans. And eventually throughout the seasons, we see that this is supposed to bring the people together. However, the corruption of human beings is still there, which means there's going to be a lot of suppression. There's still going to be a class hierarchy, and there's still going to be a lot of people who don't give a crap about human beings, even though they're literally the last ones alive. It's extremely political, extremely interesting, but it shows you that the outside agitator, RB3, attacking us makes us come together, right? It's that whole idea of like, we don't know what this is. Let's put our differences aside, come together, and destroy that thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, and, you know, and bringing real life politics into it, that's what 9/11 was essentially. Like when the whole incident happened and the towers fell, all of America came together. We all rallied around, and, depending on where your political beliefs lie, maybe that was the best decision. Maybe that wasn't, since we had, a president during that time. But, that just is indicative of like the American way. You even look at from a movie example, right? Like Spider-Man, the original Sam Raimi 2002 Spider-Man. Like even when Spider-Man was saving the day and helping all the people on the train, all the New Yorkers are like, "Yeah, Spider-Man, you could do it. We're New Yorkers. We could do it." That's just kind of the American way. That's like the American rally call that like we can overcome anything. So that's just like an age-old thing that we've seen throughout cinema, and they kind of use it to like really. The most beautiful effect of having the president, who's played by Bill Paxton. Bill Paxton
Pullman.
plays Bill Pullman. I'm sorry. Yeah, president played by Bill Pullman. I mean, that amazing speech he like gives towards the end of it. That's like the best motivational speech ever.
But as the day when the world declared in one voice, "We will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day."
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because in that scene and in the scenes before that, we see this kind of worldwide effect. And I know Sabrina was talking about the idea of like very American and very patriotic, but it's a really kind of, it's goofy, but it's actually kind of powerful when you see like the Middle Eastern people coming together, and then I think it's the Japanese. They cut to the Japanese coming together, and it's all this idea of like the world is in this together, trying to fight this outside agitator. What do you think of that whole idea of like world unity and world peace coming together at the end of the movie? And there's even this funny scene where like the Jewish guy's praying with like the Christian guy. I don't know if you guys know
I remember that.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's that idea, right, where it's like we're all the same. It doesn't matter who we're praying to. We're praying together, and we're all one people, just human beings. Sabrina.
Oh yeah. I really do. I think it sends a really, really great message, but it's interesting because it's like it's something that will probably never be attainable in real life. So it's a nice thing to see on screen when something is, there's that force that's going against everybody, and then us, the Americans, of course, are the ones that are able to fix it all. And kind of, it really does ground everything. And I think it grounds people's beliefs because we were at a point where it's like end of the world, world domination, that type of thing. And the fact that it didn't happen, it's almost like it takes something huge, like RB3 was saying with real world, with like 9/11, to think of like, okay, we are all on this earth together. We're separated by borders, things like that. No, we're all just like humans. And let's celebrate the fact that we're all humans. So it's a beautiful thing to see at the end because it's something that we haven't really experienced as the world coming together and really celebrating something all together and not being separated by religion, what country you're from, ethnicity, anything like that. So it definitely kind of poses something really interesting.
What do you think about that, RB3?
Well, it's funny because, like, we talked about 9/11 and how there was, like, this big, like, coming together. And now we're kind of in COVID, which is something much more deadly and something much more kind of impactful. But it's like what's kind of the exact opposite is happening. It's like we're kind of becoming more divided. But I think it's because it's the idea of, like, philosophy and human philosophy, like we have to see the tragedy, right? We have to see the incident. We have to see the violence. With coronavirus, it's a little different because it's more of like an invisible terror kind of thing. Yeah. And that's where movies like The Thing are like super impactful because it deals with that idea of like fear of not just the unknown, but the invisible of what we can't see. Like Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien. A lot of movies deal with that kind of invisible kind of terror and horror, that does end up doing more division than it ends up doing more than it does coming together. Yeah. But then something like Independence Day is, the opposite example of like the more dynamic, the more visual, the more violent impact of it, because you literally see the White House blow up. There's that scene I think about when all of the when there's like a bunch of those protesters who are like pro-alien or whatever, and they're holding their signs.
Talk about that.
Yeah, and then but they end up getting blown up too. So it's like you see, like they spend literally a good like 5-minute chunk of the entire movie showing you what gets blown up, how it's getting blown up, and then that just causes everybody to come together because of that, because it's a visual thing.
That's such an interesting point, right? Because again, and I'm sorry guys, but I'll go back to Attack on Titan. And Attack on Titan, the idea is like, we're all humans, we're in this together. The Titans are attacking us, let's join together. And it's kind of the opposite. What they do is like, oh, the Titans are attacking us, let's feed the poor people to the Titans, because we don't want to be, you see what I'm saying? Like it just divides them more, and it becomes this class structure of like, well, if the Titans attack, I guess we gotta feed the poor people to them, because we don't want to get eaten by the Titans. And it's that idea of like, even though we have that outside agitator, if anything, it just divides us even more as human beings. But yeah, that's such an interesting idea. Let's quickly jump to a scene that I think is a huge scene in the movie, and it's very telling as far as what the movie wants to do, and it kind of goes back to our entire thoughts on this. It's the scene where the president talks to the alien through the psychic, through the doctor guy, I forget his name. But he talks to him, and the first thing the president says is there any chance for peace, or something like that. He's like, hey, is there any chance for peace or a diplomatic way to this avenue? And the alien just kind of laughs at him, and he's like, we don't want peace, we just want to destroy you, and we want you dead. And then he's like, all right, we're going to nuke their ass. I think he literally says, like, nuke them after that scene. But it's that idea of, like, peace sucks, let's just blow shit up. I don't know. That's kind of what I got out of it, where I was like, okay, I don't know what they're trying to say with that scene, except, like, hey, peace is kind of boring. Nukes is so much cooler. I don't know what you think of that, Sabrina.
Well, it wouldn't be the same movie if they had peace. Would we? Yeah. No, I'm kidding. But it really is insane because I wasn't even born when it came out. I don't think either was like RB3, or you were just born. Very, very small people. So anyways, but I've heard about a trailer. Like, I don't know if you remember it because obviously you were a little older, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard there was like it might have been like Super Bowl or something that was huge, and it was just the White House blowing up, and then it was like Independence Day. And I've heard about that, and I've actually never even seen it, but it is really interesting because obviously it won Best Visual Effects, and so it's like profound in that way, and it kind of was like a resurgence for this type of like science fiction, like world doom type of thing. And that's why it's still talked about to this day. But yeah, that idea of like peace, it's almost like because we don't know that in our world, in our history. We never really, when do we ever see something like a conflict actually get settled with peace? It's always war, and it's us versus them. It's two people against each other. And so it's one of those things that like, it's kind of a reflection of like how we would genuinely deal with this. Like obviously it's almost like, this outside force might be a little bit stronger because they are unknown. So then we would like to do the whole peace thing. But then once they don't want it, it's like you go back and you're like, all right, well, it's time to fight. And now we band together. Let's get this started. We have no idea where it's going to go. So that is a really interesting scene to point out.
Yeah, and obviously it goes back to what you were saying, RB3, about the protest scene, where they're just like, we love you, and they're just like, oh, we're gonna blow your ass up.
Yeah.
Which shows like this whole side of like those peace loving hippie alien lovers are gonna get exploded.
Yeah. I mean,
At least that's what I got from it.
No, I mean, it harkens back to like that old school like mentality of like the fear of the others. Like,
Fear of the other.
there's no peace; they're just gonna blow you up. Like, and that's what this movie just represents, like just through and through. And that's something that was a very big, they felt like was a big threat, like in the 1950s and all that kind of stuff. And it's just something that has become such a staple in like our cinema, especially up into the 90s, that they didn't really even take the chance, the opportunity to like correct the issue from that on that front. But I do think that I do think what was interesting about that scene that Andres mentioned is the idea of like the president, right, being like this military guy who is strictly like, like the only solution is to nuke them. But when you look at like the actual solution to the problem, it's really the scientists who end up figuring out how to fix how to take down the aliens. It's really technology that ends up taking them down. With like the corny little like USB drive that they insert, like as if like a floppy disk is gonna like actually like fit into like an alien thing or whatever. But again, like those old movies dealt a lot with the like dichotomy between like science and military, like, and who's gonna win out because of that. So it's just fascinating that this movie deals with that too.
And you know what was another thing that it kind of reminded me of was, I don't know if you've ever seen the Twilight Zone episode, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Oh, I haven't seen that one, no.
That's something that was probably, my dad was really into the Twilight Zone, so that was one, like an episode I totally watched repeatedly when I was a kid, because it's really interesting. It's about aliens basically invading like a certain town. Like it was more grounded because it was literally just a neighborhood. And it kind of showed the self-destruction of like everybody in the town and how they like don't really band together and things like that with the outside force. So then this is different in that way where they do. So I think that's like an interesting thing, because obviously this is something that we saw in the 60s with the Twilight Zone episode versus like the 90s. And it's like, how have we evolved in terms of storytelling and filmmaking when it comes to this type of thing? It really is so cool to see that kind of thing on screen.
I kind of want to talk about the idea of when this movie comes out and kind of what it represents. What do you guys think of the whole terrorist angle, RB3? And I know this is pre 9/11, but this is the 90s when the Middle Eastern terrorist organizations were kind of rising up in America, and Americans like the CIA were trying to get more info on them, and we're starting to find more terrorist acts around the world, specifically Africa and certain parts of the Middle East. What do you think of that, if it represents some sort of idea of like what terrorism is?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually that's a really good observation. I think, that is definitely during a time that there is, again, it's a continued theme throughout the history of America, like the fear of other people, the fear of what we don't know, the fear of our neighbors and our brothers and sisters like on this country who, are dealing with conflicts outside of us. It also deals with a lot of, even with the CIA monitoring a lot of like terrorist organizations, a lot of those organizations grew to prominence because of how much we interfered in other countries' affairs, like how we interfered with like dictatorships and like trying to create democracies and all this kind of stuff. Like across the sea, when instead of focusing on the issues at home, we decide to focus on issues outside of the country. So it's like, it's a sad thing, but I think that's a big part of why what Independence Day represents on a metatextual level. It's like, yeah, like, even no matter like how much of a problem we create, we're always going to find a way to either like bomb our way out of it, or I guess, floppy disk our way out of it. So
In this case.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just think that's kind of an interesting point, considering that the 90s was kind of the rise of these radical extremist groups. That was the rise of Osama bin Laden. That's when he kind of got his prominence, was in the 90s around this time. And again, maybe that's just because I know that information. I don't know if Roland Emmerich was trying to do that, but it's just something that kind of occurred to me where I was like, oh, it's interesting that this was that period when it started to become a thing. Any thoughts on that, Sabrina, before we move on?
No, I just echo everything you guys said on that. That's something I actually really didn't even think about and pick up till you brought it up. So that's why I love doing this podcast with you guys, because we get all those different perspectives.
Yeah, Andres, you bringing up like the heavy-hitting topics here. Jeez.
Dang.
I know. I'm sorry, guys. Watch Looming Tower. It's a great show. Looming Tower talks about kind of the rise of these terrorist organizations during this period. And it was around this time, like 95, 94, when they were coming up. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant has become Will Smith. This is his, like you said, RB3, his coming to the big screen, taking over as like the biggest Hollywood star there is. Fresh Prince, fresh out of Fresh Prince. Will Smith, welcome to Earth. Tell me about that, man.
Yeah, no, I think it's super dope. This came out around the same time that Bad Boys came out too. Like,
that's right.
Yeah, so they both came out, I think, summer of '96, and it's just telling that, like, we see the kind of star that Will Smith was going to ultimately end up becoming, because those two movies represent like totally opposite like sides of the coins almost. Like, the original Bad Boys was really more of like a low budget cop movie that had like some comedy in it, but was very stylized through like the Michael Bay lens, right? The Independence Day is also kind of like a Michael Bay-esque movie, but like on a big, massive blockbuster scale with like a huge ensemble, like multiple characters. So he's playing more of a supportive role in this movie, but he's a supportive role that's like a dynamic enough and personality driven enough to where he just stands out and like steals the show like pretty much the entire time. So like that's where you get iconic lines like "Welcome to Earth," or you get like other like just all these great moments just throughout the entire film. I think that Will Smith just adds like a whole new level of charisma and charm that really wasn't found in much else in any other parts throughout this movie.
Yeah, Sabrina?
Yeah, it is really crazy because we actually talked about, how some rappers actually moved on to television or film or things like that. And so he is able to kind of take on all these roles and have a successful rap career, go on to, become one of the most charismatic actors we have still working today. I mean, with Bad Boys coming out, with Aladdin, he took the mantle from, which I know you love.
Aladdin!
Taking the mantle of playing the genie from Robin Williams. Like, that's a huge, huge part to take. And so obviously we see Bad Boys, we see Independence Day, and then we also see stuff like Men in Black. And he took something like this, and even if he wasn't like the main role, he proved himself that he could be in any scene, and he could definitely elevate it, and he can bring that charisma, and he can bring that charm, and just really stick out no matter what role he's given.
Yeah, he plays like obviously the cocky pilot whose skills are indispensable, I guess. It's like the idea of like, we need the greatest pilot in the world to fly this alien ship. And it's like, we got Will Smith. Almost similar to like an Armageddon type feel where it's like, we need the best driller in the world. And it's homeboy, I forget his name.
Bruce Willis.
Yeah, but it's that idea of like one special skill, and he's kind of the oddball, like cocky dude. And it's same with Jeff Goldblum, because Jeff Goldblum plays like the super brainy scientist guy, which he's done before this movie. I believe he did it in a few movies. I mean, obviously The Fly is one example, but it's the idea of Jeff Goldblum kind of playing to to his type, which is that kind of cocky, brainy scientist guy. I mean, again, Jurassic Park,
yeah.
for crying out loud, like he does the chaos theory effect, which is great because that's the kind of I don't know, that's the kind of like thing that you could, if I'm a kid and I see Jeff Goldblum and I'm like, man, science is kind of cool, or computers are kind of cool. That's the whole effect of like the brainy scientist kid grows up to save the world. Right. I don't know what you think of that, RB3.
No, I mean, again, it goes to what we talked about earlier, like how in older movies, it was always about like the military being the guys to take down the aliens. We take them down by force. We take them down by bombs. But like in the modern era, it's through technology and through science. And even in the 90s, it was, floppy disk and, flying ships. But in 2016 or 2017, when Arrival comes out, it becomes about communication and language. Like it becomes even more evolved. So like even though like Independence Day is a throwback to like this old school type of action movie and sci-fi movie, it does bring in the relevance of like the evolving sci-fi genre.
Yeah. Sabrina?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this, even just with Jeff Goldblum's character, when we're talking about that, the way they establish his character right from the start, that's one thing I'll give this film so much credit for as well, is the script. Like you said, the film is self-aware. The script is really interesting, and it's really, really great. I don't know if you guys have like revisited it or like read it or anything like that. It's super interesting because it sets up so much in the scene with him and his father that we get that payoff throughout the rest of the film. And you do so in a way where you're absorbing all this information about Jeff Goldblum's character in such a short time without even realizing it. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there in the movie. Obviously, there's the whole like, you left me for the president, how dare you? Jeff Goldblum triangle thing that they have between them and the president. There's also the idea of a disaster movie, right? Because that's something we haven't really touched on, is how this is still a classic disaster movie of a look at all this crazy madness going on. What would you do in this scenario? And it's interesting because disaster movies have kind of gone out of, I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, but I feel like they've gone out of, people don't care about them anymore. As far as popularity goes, I mean, San Andreas is an example.
Even like 2012, I just feel
that
like
was a while ago. Yeah,
2012, or like the Fifth Wave or whatever, that one with Chloe Grace Moretz.
Yeah, that made no money.
Like that made no money, and it's like, it's almost like, I don't know, we talked about the themes kind of for the past like decade in film, and how like cynical everything is, and sometimes you're trying to get your escape from like the real world. And when we feel like, especially right now with everything that's going on, it's almost like it's been done so many times that it would have to be something really special to capture the attention. Something like this is what makes this unique and sets itself apart from something like The Fifth Wave or 2012 or any of those, just banking on the fact that we all thought the world was going to end in 2012.
Yeah, and I want to finish up on the final character that I think is kind of relevant, the president, right? It's this idea of what a president is and what a president should be, and the idea of that scene where he tells the military general, like, I'm going to join the fight, and he grabs his helmet, and he's like, I'm going to lead the fighters, as if it's a Star Wars movie. And he's like the president of the United States getting in an F-17, Raptor jet. And it's that idea of like, what? You're crazy. That would not fly nowadays. But the idea of how the general's like, you can't do that, you're the president, and he's like, get out of my way. And the other elephant in the room that I feel like I don't know, I kind of want to talk about, the idea that the actual president right now retweeted this film, and his head on the president as if it's like a good thing, where he's giving the speech and someone like fitted President Trump's head on the president during the speech. Did you guys see that?
I didn't see that. No.
This was a month and a half ago when the COVID spikes were happening, and he retweeted that, where someone, this is on his Twitter, it's probably still up, put his face on the president's face from Independence Day during the speech, as if he's giving the speech. It's really poor taste. And it's during a lot of deaths that are happening in the U.S. And it's also when he said that we should stop testing. So it's kind of ironic that he feels like oh, look at me, I'm like the president in Independence Day. I don't know what you think of that. So, RB3.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's just some wacky stuff. Again, like I said, like usually people would like rally behind leaders or rally behind a president like during a time like this, but like we don't really live in that kind of climate right now, especially
Yeah.
like who the leader is. So like I don't know. I don't think there's anything Trump could say that would like actually bring people together at this point. So we'll just have to see. I don't know.
I just find it kind of ironic that he's trying to imitate a president who, in the movie, is trying to deal with all this stuff, and he can't even talk. Like, homie, how would you talk to an alien? You can't even talk. I don't know, Sabrina. I'll finish with you.
Yeah, well, I think this president, like in the film, I don't know if he's trying to like be like, oh yeah, like I'm like this, because I feel like that president is a lot better of a person than Trump is, and even just him going about it the way that he did when he did try to preserve peace, at least for a while. I feel like Trump is the absolute opposite of that, with his chaotic energy on like Twitter and stuff like that. So I didn't see it. That's absolutely ridiculous, but he always just keeps doing stuff like that, obviously.
Yeah. This president in the movie wanted to nuke the aliens, and Trump wanted to nuke a hurricane. That's real, guys. That's real news. You guys not hear about that?
I heard about that. No, I heard about that. Yeah, that's funny.
Serious?
Yeah.
Oh my god. But even the president in the film, like he was a veteran and things like that. Yeah. So he kind of like encapsulates this idea of like an American hero. And what we see is that like even going forward throughout his like presidency and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which again is the complete opposite of what Trump is.
Exactly.
Yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I can think of for Independence Day. Any final words before we move on? No. Alrighty, guys. Make sure you guys stick around, because after the break, we're going to be talking about the other Independence Day movie and the future of Independence Day movies. So make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 4/5 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a bloodbath. You do the math, take you out the equation. This ain't funny, so don't you dare.
Check out this week's episode of Netflix Roulette, where Cade and his guest Stella Scott discuss the Australian sports feel-good film Dance Academy: The Comeback. Enjoy.
If you had to do like an impression of like what they were thinking when they did that, what would it be?
Like, all right, so this map is not anatomically correct, so it probably just takes about 5 hours to get to Texas. 5 hours?
Is
6,
Texas
7,
is Texas
8.
before or after
Right.
California?
Yeah. And they stop off in Los Angeles before or after Houston. And also they're like, welcome to Texas. As if like Texas is one city. It's like, aren't you in a specific place in Texas?
Right, like Houston, Austin, like
Are you on the
where
border of Texas? You're like, welcome to the border of Texas. I don't know.
I can't blame him though. Like, I'm sure if I was to make a movie about Australia, I would do the same thing.
Yeah, I'm like, woof. Perth to the next stop, Sydney. Like,
The
I don't know what the distance between that is, so.
We're in the
No
outback.
judgment. I mean, we're judging, but at the same time,
It's
like,
fun. It's fun.
I'm giving permission for people to judge my lack of knowledge as well.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We're back talking about Independence Day. Now we're going to be talking about the sequel, which is called Independence Day Resurgence, I believe. It goes to show you how much we care about this movie, guys. I know RB3 was kind of foaming at the mouth to talk about it because he loves this one so much. RB3, tell me, man, how was this experience watching this movie in theaters?
Well, I have nothing to say about this movie other than it's absolutely terrible. The one thing I kind of get a kick out of this movie for is the fact that I got to watch it with the Schmoes No crew, like back in the day. I believe when it came out during the day of like Dennis's 40th birthday. So it was like my first time seeing a movie with those guys. I thought it was going to be really awesome. I laughed a lot, like unintentionally in this movie.
Yeah.
So that was a good time, but otherwise it's an absolute piece of trash. It's
I always wonder that, right? When you're in a theater with RB3 and he's laughing a lot, you would assume, well, maybe he really enjoyed this movie. It turns out that's not always the case, right, RB3?
No, you should know that better than anybody because we've seen movies together and you'd be like, you laughed the entire time. I was like, so I still hate it.
I have said that. I forgot what movie that was where you were enjoying it so much, and then I was like, man, RB3 loves this. Sabrina, what are your thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, so going into it, I was really excited. I just kind of assumed it was at least going to be decent. So I went with my dad, and literally, we almost like walked out of it because it was so bad. But like, I've only like walked out of a movie theater once, and that was from like the second 50 Shades movie, and I was like, all right, this ain't for me.
Oh, really?
So yeah, so we didn't quite walk out. It has to be really, really bad for me to walk out. But this one is it's so bad, and everybody behind it, it's just very interesting what they were trying to do and how they just completely missed it. Like, they didn't capture any of the feel. They even tried to like kind of emulate like the speech, a similar scene, and it just, nothing hit the same way the other one did. So yeah, this one, not good.
Yeah. You guys want to see a better Independence Day sequel? Go watch Pacific Rim. Now that's a movie. That's a fun movie.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, they had, what is his name? Liam Hemsworth.
Yeah.
As Jeff Goldblum's son, and then they had homeboy who was in Shaft. I forget his name.
Jesse Usher.
Yes. Wow, look at you, man. Schmodown. Who played Will Smith's son, and they didn't get Will Smith back for the movie, which already was a sign of like, hey, this might not be good. Will Smith didn't want to sign up for it.
Well, I guess part of the reason why it was bad is because they wrote a version of the script with Will Smith and a version of it without him. And I guess since Will Smith didn't come back, they just used the version without him, I guess. Which, I don't know. It was pretty lifeless and boring, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, where do you see this franchise going?
Where I see it, I see it as dead in the water. I don't think they're ever going to go back to it again. I mean, first one was a monster hit, but the second one was a ginormous flop when it came out. So I don't think they're going to really do anything else with this, personally.
Sabrina?
Yeah, I agree. I just don't really see, it's kind of like what you mentioned earlier. People aren't really going to like flocking to see these types of films anymore, unless it's something really spectacular. It's almost like something like Arrival with that whole grounded, introspective take on it is something that's more interesting to audiences nowadays versus something like an Independence Day. And if it was done well, maybe that would have been a different story. But obviously this wasn't done well, so we'll never know. And I don't really see them kind of bringing this back anytime soon. Maybe in like 30 years we want to see something. Maybe the whole climate's different. I don't know, but I don't see a future for it.
Yeah, it kind of goes to talk about the future of sci-fi alien movies, right? We don't have too many. The only big thing I can think of, RB3, and I don't know if you watch this show, Sabrina, but I think they do it really well, and maybe it's just because I'm a fanboy, but Stranger Things. The way Stranger Things handles kind of the similar thing, right? I mean, it's a giant alien creature trying to eat you. It's not like it's this grounded sci-fi story, but it's at the same time, it's really well explained and well done and well documented, the way they try to break it down in a dimensional travel type thing, and the way they center it around likable characters like these kids, and at the same time make it kind of exciting as far as what these scientific collisions mean. But the sci-fi alien genre as a whole, where do you guys see that going?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Oh, no, it's okay. I really like that you actually brought up Stranger Things, because I think that's a really cool kind of... It was a massive hit the second it came out, and, you know, nobody was really prepared for that type of thing yet. Like nobody had any idea how big it was going to get, and I know they're about to shoot their 4th season, which they say is the final season, and I really like how they kept it. They were like, you know what, we're not going to drag this on. This is what it's going to be. We're going to tell this story, and we're going to have a final season at the 4th. And they said it early on. And with something like that, it's special because of the way they did the world building, the way they incorporate kind of like the government and science and things like that. Something like that I feel like could play really well, whether it's something like Stranger Things, which is more fun and nostalgic and kind of like a warm feel, or if it's something more serious. I think if they ground it and kind of really involve like government and all of that type of stuff, I feel like sci-fi alien type of films can kind of really benefit from something like that.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the reason why I brought up Stranger Things is because I also feel like it's a little self-aware. Like, that's kind of what makes it such a likable show, is that it is kind of goofy at times. And they do things that are specifically to make you laugh and raise an eyebrow kind of thing. Whether it's, 80s montages and stuff like that. Like they purposely do that to make it very fun and very likable. But yeah, I just think that's a better example of specifically Aliens and where that can go, right? Because that's what Stranger Things is.
And I think what makes Stranger Things a little more accessible in something like Independence Day, at least for today's generation, is that the first season of Stranger Things kind of framed a lot of it through like the perspective of kids. Like, it's a lot about kids, it's a lot about children. Everybody can relate to being kids. And I think that's why something like E.T. was so impactful when it came out, because it's like a kid's story with aliens. That's something that's a little more optimistic. So I think ultimately, even though Stranger Things, the aliens and the creatures are bad, it still has an overall like hopeful kind of tone for like humanity overall. You know what I mean? Especially with Eleven and her friendship with her friends. So
yeah, absolutely. Obviously, 4th of July weekend, we're not going to get any movies, but usually we would. It would be a big blockbuster type movie. Unfortunately, we're not getting that this year. As a whole, how are you guys going to spend the rest of your 4th of July? That's my final question.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I really don't know. I mean, today's 4th of July,
Yes, it is.
So, I guess I'm just going to go back to eating barbecue that I'm doing right now.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because I feel like a lot of people, and maybe it's just because I'm feeling that Arizona vibe, are being like, you took my 4th of July. And I'm like, did you? You could still make cheeseburgers, bro, and watch a movie. Like, chill. I don't know. That's just what I've been hearing a lot of, is like, my 4th of July weekend is ruined. And I'm like, how?
Well, it's not
burgers, bro.
And honestly, there's no real 4th of July because every day they pop off the illegal fireworks.
I was gonna say
it's not gonna be something special on the
What's
4th.
homeboy's name? Mayor Garcetti is like ripping his hair out.
Yeah.
He's like, stop with them damn fireworks.
Mayor Garcetti. I'm basically doing the same thing that I've always been doing. I'll probably check out Hamilton, Eurovision, things like that. Some movies that I really want to catch up on during this time. But yeah, I'm going to be inside doing my thing. If I do step outside, I'm going to be wearing a damn mask. And that's basically it.
There you go. Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for listening and for enjoying the First Cut crew, the Meaning of Podcast. You can find me at Squad Leader Ace.
You can find me at Director RB3.
You can find me at Sabrina X Monica and at Sabrina on Film.
And you could also follow the First Cut crew at First Cut TMO on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you guys subscribe if you haven't done so already. For the Meaning of Podcast, I am Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And we're peacing out. Peace out, guys.